My name is Mary Turner, and at 34 I learned that the chair I'd been sitting in for 17 years came with a price tag nobody bothered to mention until I tried to stand up. Visual: a folding chair in a garage. Dust on the metal legs. It was a Tuesday when my mother called to tell me my father had been taken to the hospital. Not a heart attack, she said, just a scare. Something with his blood pressure. He was fine, she said. She was calling because they needed me to pick up my brother's daughter from daycare and bring her to their house for dinner. Just this once. She was so sorry to ask, but Carolyn's car was in the shop, and Carolyn had a meeting, and David was out of town, and they couldn't ask David's sister because she'd already done it twice this month, and they didn't want to impose. I said okay. I said it the way I always said okay. The way I said okay when I was 9 years old, and my mother explained that I had to give up my bedroom because my grandmother was moving in, and I was the only one who would understand. I was 9 years old, and my mother sat me down at the kitchen table and told me that grandmother needed the room with the good light. I was the only one who'd understand. I was a reasonable girl. My brother David was 2 years older, and he'd already had a hard year with his baseball tryouts and his reading tutor, and the way the other boys teased him about his glasses. I was a reasonable girl, and reasonable girls didn't need the same things other children needed. Reasonable girls slept on the pull-out couch in the den and tiptoed past their grandmother's door in the morning and never ever complained, because complaining was the first sign that you weren't actually reasonable at all. That was the first time I heard the phrase. I was too young to name it then, but I heard it. You always understand. My mother said it like a compliment, like a medal she was pinning to my chest. You always understand, Marie. That's what makes you such a wonderful daughter. And I was 9 years old, and I believed her because why wouldn't I? She was my mother, and she was telling me something good about myself. I was the one who understood. I was the one who made everything easier. I was the one who didn't need anything. Visual: the den, a fold-out couch, a lamp with a torn shade. The second time I heard it, I was 17 years old, and I had saved every paycheck from my job at the grocery store for 8 months. I had $4,200 in a savings account that my father helped me open. I was going to use it for college. I was going to use it to buy a car that wasn't my mother's old station wagon with the tape deck that ate cassettes and the passenger door that only opened from the inside. I had a plan. I had a list. I had the whole thing written out in a notebook I kept in my backpack. Then, my brother David totaled his truck. Not his fault, my father said. The other driver ran a stop sign. But David only had liability coverage, and the truck was older than I was, and there was no way to fix it without more money than anyone had. My parents sat me down in the same kitchen where I'd been told I was reasonable 8 years earlier. David needed a car to get to his job. He needed a car to get to his classes. He couldn't borrow my father's truck because my father used it for work. David had to have something reliable, and I had $4,200 just sitting there. I wasn't using it yet. I could save it again. They'd pay me back. Of course they'd pay me back. My mother put her hand on mine. You always understand, Marie. You're the one we can count on. I gave them the money. I gave them every dollar I had earned bagging groceries and stocking shelves and cleaning the break room at the end of my shifts. I gave it to them, and I told myself it was temporary because that was what reasonable people did. Reasonable people loaned their brothers money when their brothers needed it. Reasonable people understood that family came first. Reasonable people didn't make a fuss about things that could be fixed later. Visual, a savings account ledger, a withdrawal slip, $4,200 crossed out. Later never came. My brother got a new truck, a used one, but new to him. A red Chevy with a dent in the tailgate that he said gave it character. And I got a bus pass and a later start at the community college I could actually afford because I'd given away my tuition money to someone who was going to need it more than I did. My parents didn't pay me back. They didn't mention it again. And I didn't ask because I was a reasonable girl, and reasonable girls didn't bring up money when they knew their parents were struggling. Reasonable girls found other ways. They worked extra shifts. They took the bus. They understood. 17 years. That's how long I'd been the one who understood. 17 years of taking the smaller room and the later dinner and the holiday weekend that nobody else wanted. 17 years of showing up early to set up my mother's parties and staying late to clean them up while everyone else went home. 17 years of being the one who could always be counted on because I was the one who would always say yes. I had a career by then, not a big one. Not the kind you'd see in a magazine. I worked in the trust department at a regional bank, the kind of job where you sit in a windowless office and manage other people's money because they don't trust themselves with it. I was good at it. I'd been doing it for 11 years. And one of the things I did that nobody in my family knew about except me, was that I managed my parents' accounts. Visual, a bank computer screen, a trust account ledger, a column of payments in tiny green numbers. Not their main accounts, not the checking account they use for groceries and gas. Their retirement accounts. Me. The annuities my father had set up 30 years ago when he still worked at the paper mill. The trust that my grandmother had left to my mother when she died. The one I'd slept on the pull-out couch to accommodate. That trust. It had grown over the years. Not a lot. Not enough to make anyone rich, but enough that my parents could have retired more comfortably than they did. Enough that they could have replaced their roof 5 years ago when it started leaking. Enough that they could have helped my brother with the down payment on his house, without borrowing against their own future. I knew the numbers. I knew exactly what was in there because I was the one who filed the quarterly statements. I was the one who made sure the required minimum distributions were taken. I was the one who caught the error when the custodian misapplied a dividend payment. I knew the numbers the way a mechanic knows the engine of a car they've been driving for 11 years. And I knew that nobody else in my family looked at those statements. Nobody else opened the envelopes. Nobody else noticed that the balance had grown by $83,000 in the last decade, while they were all too busy to pay attention. I didn't think about it as leverage. Not then. I thought about it the way I thought about all of it, as something I did because I was the one who noticed things. The one who opened the mail. The one who checked the boxes. The one who understood. The mechanism showed up in a form I'd filed 3 years earlier. A beneficiary designation form. My father had asked me to update it. Just a routine thing, he said. The old one had his sister's name on it, and she died the year before, and he didn't want things getting tangled up in probate. I filled it out for him. He signed it. I filed it. It was a boring piece of paper. Nobody read it carefully because nobody had to. It was a boring piece of paper with boring legal language about contingent beneficiaries and successor trustees. Visual, a legal document. The words irrevocable and successor trustee. But I read it. I always read everything. And when I read it, I noticed something my father hadn't noticed when he signed it. The form had a box. A check box. A box that said the successor trustee named below shall serve without bond. And below it, in my father's handwriting, my name. Marie Turner. Successor trustee. Effective upon the death or incapacity of the current trustees. I didn't think about it as a lever. Not then. I thought about it as a piece of paper in a file. A piece of paper that meant, if something happened to my parents, I would be the one in charge of the trust. I would be the one making the decisions. I would be the one who understood. 3 weeks after my mother called about my father's blood pressure, my brother called about his wedding. Not his first wedding. His second. The first one had been when he was 23, to a woman named Michelle who my mother said was too much. They were divorced within 2 years. Now he was marrying Carolyn, the woman whose daughter I'd picked up from daycare on Tuesday afternoon. Carolyn was the one my mother approved of. Carolyn was the one who showed up to Easter dinner with the right side dishes, and the right hair and the right way of making small talk. Carolyn was the one my mother wished David had found the first time around. "We're doing it at the club," David said. "Mom's already talked to the catering manager. She's handling everything." I was quiet on the phone. I was always quiet on the phone. "Sounds nice," I said. "She wants you to coordinate the rentals, chairs and tables and all that. You're so good with that stuff." Visual. A phone on a kitchen counter, a notepad, the word rentals underlined twice. I was good with that stuff. I was good with all of it. I was good with the stuff nobody else wanted to do. I was good with the phone calls and the spreadsheets and the vendor contracts. I was good with showing up early and staying late. Well, I was good with being invisible while other people got the credit. "Fine," I said. "Send me the details." My brother's wedding was 3 months away, and my mother had a vision. A big one. The kind of vision that required custom linens and chair covers, and a dance floor that had to be laid down the morning of the event. She sent me lists, emails, text messages with links to websites I was supposed to browse and compare. She CC'd me on everything. She told everyone she was letting Marie handle it, because Marie had such good taste, and Marie was so organized, and Marie didn't mind doing the legwork. And I didn't mind. That was the thing. I didn't mind because it was what I'd always done. It was the role I'd been cast in when I was 9 years old, and I'd never been given a different one. I was the one who handled things. I was the one who understood. But I started to notice something. A pattern. The same pattern that had been there my whole life. Only I was finally old enough to see it. I noticed that when my mother asked me to coordinate something, she never asked Carolyn. She never asked David. She never asked my father, who had retired and had nothing but time. She asked me, "Oh." And when it was done, when the rentals were booked and the deposits were paid and the spreadsheet was organized by color-coded columns, nobody thanked me. They just moved on to the next thing. Visual. A spreadsheet. 10 tabs. A budget column. Hours worked. tracked in a second column. I tracked the hours. I know why I did it. Maybe it was the bank in me. Maybe it was the 17 years of being the one who understood finally catching up to my own awareness. I tracked every hour I spent on that wedding. What to do? Every phone call, every email, every drive to a rental warehouse to look at chair samples. I tracked them in a spreadsheet I didn't share with anyone. I just wanted to see. I wanted to know what my time would look like if I measured it the way I measured everything else. 73 hours. I spent 73 hours on my brother's wedding before I even picked out my own dress. 73 hours of my life that nobody in my family would ever account for. My mother called me on a Friday afternoon. She was breathless, excited. "Marie, I need you to do something for me. The payment for the florist, they need a credit card on file by Monday, and I don't have a card with enough available credit. Can you put it on yours, just temporarily? I'll pay you back at the end of the month." I was at my desk, the windowless office with the humming fluorescent lights. I had a stack of quarterly statements in front of me, my parents' statements. "How much?" I said. "Oh, just a few thousand. 3,000, maybe a little more. I haven't gotten the final estimate yet, but it shouldn't be more than $4,000. $4,000. The same amount I'd given my brother when I was 17. The same amount that had never been paid back. Visual, a credit card statement, a limit, a balance document. "Mom," I said, and my voice came out even. "I can't. My credit card is close to its limit." She paused. I could hear the air conditioning in her kitchen, the clink of a glass being set down. "Well, can't you just ask for a limit increase? You've had that card for years. They'll do it over the phone." "I don't think that's a good idea," I said. "Marie," her voice changed. It got tighter. "You always understand. This is for your brother's wedding. This is important." 17 years. I had been hearing those words my whole life. You always understand. They were the key that unlocked every favor, every sacrifice, every time I'd given up something I needed so someone else could have what they wanted. You always understand. It was a lever they'd used on me so many times it had worn smooth. But I was 34 years old, and I had a job and a credit score and a lease on an apartment that had rent control and a bedroom door that locked from the inside. I was 34 years old, and I had a sheet of paper in a file that said I was the successor trustee of a trust my mother couldn't be bothered to open the quarterly statements for. "I'll figure something out," I said. "I have to go. I have a client meeting." I hung up the phone and sat in the quiet of my office. The fluorescent hummed. The stack of statements sat on my desk, and I had a thought I'd never let myself have before. A thought I'd buried under every single time I'd said, "Okay," and every single time I'd told myself I was the reasonable one. Visual, the stack of statements, a pen, the signature line. The thought was this: what if I stopped understanding? What if I stopped being the one who handled things? What if I just stepped back? What would happen to the wedding? What would happen to the trust? What would happen to my mother's parties and my father's paperwork? And the endless, exhausting machinery of being the person who made everything run. I didn't know. I'd never not known. I'd always been the one who knew. I didn't do anything that day. Not yet. No. I went home and made dinner and watched television and went to sleep. But I'd felt the shape of it, the possibility of it, the quiet, ordinary possibility of just not being the one. 2 weeks later, my brother sent me a text. He needed me to confirm the chair rental. The rental I'd booked 3 weeks earlier, which he would have known if he'd read a single email I'd sent him. I confirmed it. Of course, I confirmed it. Then I called the rental company and asked for a copy of the contract. Visual, a rental contract, a signature line, my name crossed out. The contract had my name on it. My signature? No. My credit card as the guarantee. $1,700 for chairs and tables and a dance floor that my brother had never asked about, had never acknowledged, had never thanked me for. I didn't cancel the order. I didn't do anything that dramatic. But I did look at the contract and I noticed something. A clause. A cancellation clause. A clause that said orders could be canceled without penalty up to 72 hours before the event. That was the window. I put the contract in a folder. I didn't think about it as a weapon. I thought about it as information. The way I thought about everything. The way I've been thinking about everything for 17 years. The wedding was 2 weeks away. My mother had stopped calling me to ask for favors. She'd found someone else. Probably Carolyn. Probably one of Carolyn's friends from the club. I was off the hook, and I didn't know why that made me feel emptier than being on it. My father called me the night before the rehearsal dinner. He was drunk. He never drank, but he was drunk, and his voice was thick, and he kept apologizing for something he couldn't quite articulate. "You've always been the one," he said, "the one who held it together. I don't know what we'd do without you." "You'd figure it out," I said. No, I don't think we would. Your mother, she doesn't see things. She doesn't see what you do." Dad. "I'm serious, Marie. You've always been the one. You've always understood." There it was again. The phrase. The same phrase I'd been hearing since I was 9 years old. And my father was saying it like it was a gift. Like it was something he was giving me. "I have to go," I said. "I have an early morning." Visual. The folder. The rental contract. The signature line. I hung up the phone and I sat on my couch in my apartment, with my bedroom door locked from the inside, and I looked at the folder on my coffee table. The folder with the rental contract. The folder with the cancellation clause. 72 hours. That was tomorrow. I didn't go to the wedding. I didn't show up to the rehearsal dinner. I didn't text or call or send a panicked message about a flat tire or a sick friend. I just didn't show up. I sat on my couch with my phone on silent, and I watched the notifications come in. My mother. My brother. My brother. My father. Carolyn. My mother again. More texts than I'd ever seen from any of them in my entire life. Visual. A phone screen. A flood of messages. The names Mom, David Dutz. They were frantic. Where was I? What happened? The chairs. The chairs were the problem. The rental company had called. No, they'd said there was a cancellation. No, they'd said the order was canceled and the chairs weren't coming, and there was no way to get new ones on a Saturday afternoon. I didn't respond. I let the phone buzz against my coffee table, and I thought about 17 years of being the one who understood. The wedding happened anyway. Of course it happened. My brother found chairs from somewhere. My mother pulled strings. Carolyn called someone at the club who knew someone, who had a cousin with a party rental business. It was a disaster. I heard later. A shambles. The chairs were mismatched. The dance floor was scratched. The whole thing looked like a high school prom with better catering. But it happened. It happened without me. And then, 2 days later, my mother showed up at my apartment. She was dressed like she was going to church, like she was going to someone's funeral. She stood in my doorway with her purse over her shoulder and her sunglasses pushed up on her head, and she didn't wait for me to invite her in before she started talking. How could you do this to us? To your own brother? You knew how important this was. You knew how much it meant to him, and you just didn't show up. You didn't call. You didn't give us any warning. You left us to scramble at the last minute. I'm sorry you were inconvenienced, I said. And I meant it. Not the way she heard it. I meant it the way I meant everything, as a measured statement of fact. Inconvenienced? You ruined the wedding? You ruined the entire day. The chairs were mismatched. The rental company said you'd canceled the order. They said you canceled it 2 days before. I did, I said. I canceled it 72 hours out, exactly within the window. She stared at me. Her mouth opened and closed. Why? Why would you do that? Visual. My apartment. A plant. A bookshelf. A stack of mail. I don't know, I said. Maybe I stopped understanding. Oh, see so? She blinked. What are you talking about? You always understand, Mom. That's what you've been telling me since I was 9 years old. You always understand, Marie. You're the reasonable one. And I was. I was reasonable for 17 years. I was so reasonable, I gave up my bedroom. I was so reasonable, I gave up my college money. I was so reasonable, I gave up my evenings and my weekends, and the life I could have had if I'd ever said no. I'm not denying. That's not, she started. The trust, I said, and I watched her face go still. I know about the trust. I know what's in it. I know it's grown $83,000 since you inherited it. I know because I've been filing the statements for 11 years. I know because I've been paying attention to the things nobody else could be bothered to know. Visual. The trust documents. The signature line. My name is successor trustee. You don't have access to that, she said. That's private. I don't need access, I said. I'm the successor trustee. I filed the paperwork. I know what it says. I know that if something happens to you or Dad, I'm the one in charge. And I know that right now, I could call the custodian and make some changes that would be very difficult to reverse. You wouldn't. I wouldn't, I said. I won't. I have no intention of touching a penny of that trust. But you're going to need to understand something. I'm done. I'm done being the one who handles things. I'm done being the one who can always count on. I'm done being the one who understands. My mother left. She didn't have anything else to say. She left and I closed the door and I sat on my couch and I waited for the next phone call. It came 2 hours later. My father. He wasn't drunk this time. He was quiet. "Marie," he said, "your mother told me what you said. Okay, Mia. You're the successor trustee." "Yes." "Do you actually want to be?" I didn't answer for a long time. I sat in my apartment with my phone pressed to my ear, and I looked at the plant on my windowsill. The plant I'd bought 3 years ago when I moved in. The plant that was still alive, because I remembered to water it. "I didn't ask for it," I said. "You just put my name on a form. The same way you put my name on everything. The same way you put my name on your Christmas card list and your emergency contact forms and your party planning spreadsheets. You just assumed I'd say yes. You assumed I'd understand." "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm sorry for that. I know I should have asked." "You should have," I said. "But you didn't. And I've decided something. I've decided I'm not going to be the one anymore. I'm not going to be the successor trustee. I'm not going to be the emergency contact. I'm not going to be the person who shows up early and stays late and makes everything run smoothly while everyone else takes a nap." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm resigning. I'm going to fill out the paperwork. I'm going to name someone else. You can have Carolyn. You can have David. You can have a professional fiduciary who charges a fee. I don't care, but I'm done." Visual. A form. A resignation. A signature line. Empty. It took me a week to file the paperwork. A week of my mother calling and leaving voicemails that I didn't listen to. A week of my brother texting me variations of the same question. What the hell happened? A week of my father calling once a day and saying nothing when I answered except for, "I understand," and then hanging up. The trust had to be amended. The custodian had to be notified. There were forms to sign and notaries to find, and I did all of it. I did it the way I'd always done everything, thoroughly, carefully, with attention to every detail. But this time I did it for myself. This time I did it to close a door. The day the paperwork was finalized, I got a phone call from my brother's wife. Carolyn. No, she wasn't calling to yell at me. She was calling to ask me a question. "Mary," she said, and her voice was careful. "Your father called David. He told David you're stepping down from the trust. He told David you're not going to be the one handling things anymore." "That's right." "Can I ask you something honest?" "Okay." "Did you ever feel like you had a choice? Like you could have said no, and it would have been fine?" Visual. A kitchen table. 2 cups of coffee. An unfinished sentence. I didn't answer right away. I thought about my mother's kitchen. The table where I'd been told I was reasonable. The den where I'd slept on the pull-out couch. The wedding I'd coordinated and the chairs I'd canceled and the phone calls I'd taken and the voicemails I'd ignored. "I don't think I ever knew I had one," I said. "I think I just did what I was supposed to do. What everyone expected. And after a while, I stopped checking to see if there was another option. Carolyn was quiet on the other end. I understand, she said. I don't think David does, but I understand. It was the first time anyone in my family had ever said those words to me without asking for something in return. The first time someone had said I understand and meant it as a receiving, not a demand. 6 months later, I had a life I'd built without any of them. I had an apartment I'd furnished myself, with furniture I'd chosen and paid for myself. I had a career I'd advanced in, one promotion past where I'd been when I was still doing my mother's quarterly statements for free. I had a cat I'd adopted from a shelter, a gray tabby who slept on my pillow and didn't care about any of it. Visual: a gray cat, a sunlit window, a bookshelf, a key on a hook. My mother called me on a Sunday afternoon. She'd been calling once a week for the last 3 months, and I'd been answering about once a month. Not because I wanted to punish her, because I just didn't need to be the one anymore. "Marie," she said, and her voice was different, softer. "I was wondering if you'd like to come to dinner. Just me and your father. No David, no Carolyn, just us." I was sitting in my apartment with my cat in my lap and a book I'd been meaning to read for 2 years. I had nowhere to be and nothing to do, and no one to manage. "Mom," I said, "I don't think I can. I have plans." "Oh," she said. "And then, what kind of plans?" "Nothing major," I said. "Just plans." It was the truth. I had plans. I had plans to sit in my apartment and read my book and not be the person who fixed everything. I had plans to be the person who didn't have to understand. And I thought, as I hung up the phone, about 17 years of understanding, 17 years of being the one, 17 years of giving up my bedroom and my money and my energy, 17 years of being told I was reasonable when what they meant was I was convenient. I'm Marie Turner and I'm 34 years old, and I don't know what kind of daughter I'm going to be from now on. I don't know if I'm going to answer the phone or go to dinner or have a relationship with any of them. But I know what I'm not going to be. I'm not going to be the one who understands. Not anymore. My name is Marie Turner. I'm 34 and learning how to say no. Jagdoon.